Will HBO cut out the middleman with Game of Thrones?
macOS Yosemite is here and it's free, but should you upgrade?
Welcome to Vertical Hold, the tech show where we channel surf through the headlines in search of the big picture. I'm Adam Turner, and I'm here with the man who always pays his debts, Alex Kidman. Alex, what's new in tech?
Google's unveiled its new Nexus tablet and smartphone. Or should I say new Nexus tablet and new Nexus slightly larger than a smartphone ought to be. The Nexus 9 is made by HTC and has a high-powered processor, high-resolution screen and no Australian on-sale date as yet. Whereas the Nexus 6 is a Motorola device and, as the name suggests, it's a 6-inch smartphone. These things are getting huge and I, for one, await the inevitable next Nexus surfboard-sized smartphone.
NBN Co has unveiled a list of 140 suburbs that will be first to connect to the new fibre to the node network as part of the government's revised national broadband network. The suburbs cover 200,000 premises in New South Wales and Queensland, and to see if you're covered you can check the rollout maps at the NBN Co website.
Apple's unveiled a whole load of new hardware it'd like you to buy. Its new headline act is the iPad Air 2, an upgraded version of the iPad Air that features Touch ID, a predictably faster processor and a high-resolution screen. Alongside the iPad Air 2 there's the iPad Mini 3, which is only a minor upgrade to last year's iPad Mini with Retina, and new iMac with Retina 5K display and Mac Mini models.
The iOS 8.1 update has brought Apple Pay to US users, letting them use the iPhone 6 and 6 Plus as a contactless credit card. There's no word when Apple Pay might come to Australia, but our high take-up of PayPass and PayWave terminals means that hopefully we'll be high on the list.
So Adam, based on that news, Nexus 9 or iPad Air 2?
Yeah, that's a tough one. Now, the 9 was 8.9 inches.
Yeah.
That's an odd sort of a size for a tablet, isn't it? It's bigger than your 7.9 inch minis, but not quite up with your Surface Pros and your iPad Airs. Is that an unusual size?
Well, I guess they had to kind of go that slight bit bigger because otherwise the Nexus 6, which frankly is a huge smartphone, was going to kind of creep up towards it. There's not so much of a gap there if you make it like a 7-inch tablet, the way the old Nexus 7 was. And at the same time, of course, they've gotten rid of the Nexus 7, they've gotten rid of the Nexus 10.
Yeah.
What about the iPad Air 2? Do you rate that?
Well, I do rate that, but what I was going to say following on from that is the iPad Mini didn't get a lot of love or a lot of attention, did it? I'm wondering if...
It got stuff all love and attention.
Exactly.
The only big difference between it and last year's model is that it's got Touch ID. That's it.
Yeah. So,
frankly, I would say if you wanted the Mini, buy last year's.
So
buy last year's as cheap as you can.
Are 7-inch tablets on the way out? Is the phablet killing the 7-inch tablet once and for all?
No, I think in Apple's case, I think it's that they wanted the iPad Air 2 to be the real big premium.
Yeah.
Hey, this has got all the wow bang features. It's got the Apple SIM, it's got Touch ID, it's got a faster processor. With the Mini, they wanted it to be that kind of cheaper thing, and they've actually kept a huge number. You can get now the original iPad Mini. You can get what they're now calling the iPad Mini 2, which is last year's Retina model, and the iPad Mini 3. You can get the iPad Air, you can get the iPad Air 2. They've never actually had this many tablets on sale. They're almost becoming Samsung in this regard.
Don't say that too loud. Alex, macOS Yosemite is here. It's free. Time to jump in?
Not necessarily.
Yeah, what's the big deal?
Okay, look, it's free and there's a bunch of new features, and obviously there's a new kind of visual design. It's a lot more kind of iOS centric if one wanted to be cynical.
Thanks very much, Apple.
Yeah, and if one wanted to be cynical, and I know people who do, you could say that they've given Johnny Ive all the crayons to play with. Yes. It's very bright and colourful, with a very kind of flattened design, which honestly you actually get used to. I've had it running on a couple of machines now for a bit, and it's a style choice that you've got to get used to, but also it's a new operating system, and there's always a pain point with new operating systems. And that's to do with the fact that they're brand new. This is not Mac exclusive. Windows has the same thing. You throw a brand new version of Windows onto your machine, especially if it's your working machine, you are in some aspect asking for trouble.
Yeah, I've always been of the opinion that unless you really like to tinker with your tech, you should pretty much stick with the operating system that came with your computer. And when you buy your next computer, you'll get the new operating system, because it's such a pain in the button. Originally, I only said that about Windows, but I'm kind of that way with Mac too. I keep getting burned with Mac. I rely on Apple Mail, and I find every time there's an upgrade, it tends to run really badly for a while. I'm not even running the one before Yosemite. I'm still on the one before
Yosemite,
that.
actually, because they've rewritten Apple Mail, and I actually like it a lot more.
Yeah, I bet
so you might find it a decent upgrade. But having said that, I'm not having too many problems with Yosemite myself, but I'm in correspondence with a whole bunch of people who are having all sorts of problems with it. So it is one of those things where it can be a very variable experience depending on the exact software you run and the way you've got all your stuff organised on your Mac in the first place.
Yeah, well, it's not my job to beta test their stuff for them. I know it's supposedly out of beta, but they can fix the bugs out. It's kind of like the never upgrade until Service Pack 1. There's no...
Yeah.
I haven't even upgraded to the last one. I'm still on the one before because that's what came with my MacBook and it works and I'm not in a hurry to break it. I'm interested to see how some of the Yosemite features work with iOS 8. So maybe sometime over Christmas when I've got a bit of downtime I might upgrade. But I'm not the guy who lines up on day one, though.
That you've got to be aware of.
Yeah.
For some of the features like handoff, which allows you to start a document in Mail on your Mac and then flick it straight over to your phone, so if you're rushing out the door, you can finish it off.
Yeah.
That's only going to work if you've got a new enough Mac. It's to do with the way the Bluetooth works and whether or not it'll actually talk to it. Now, within Yosemite, it's smart enough to say, look, if this isn't going to work, you're just not going to get the option. The little checkbox to say, hey, enable handoff, it just isn't there and you are stuffed. You are plain out of luck. But again, in some ways, that's a bit of a disincentive to upgrade because if you're upgrading for features that you're not going to get, well, what are you actually getting?
So that relies on Bluetooth, does it? I didn't realise that.
It relies on part of the Bluetooth implementation for how it actually talks back and forth between your iOS device and your Mac. And it's a specific implementation, and off the top of my head, about mid 2011, 2012 I think it is exactly when you have to have bought your Mac for it to be applicable there. Obviously you've also got to have an iOS 8 capable device to get that side of things as well. But it's not a case where you will automatically have it just because your Mac can run Yosemite. And I'm in this situation. I have a bunch of Macs which can run Yosemite and do not seem to be having too many problems. And I know some people who'll be wanting to throw axes at me for that statement. But sorry guys, I'm not hitting the problems, but I know plenty of people are. But handoff is one of those things that it just can't do.
How far does the backwards compatibility go with Yosemite? Because I know I think it was the move to Mountain Lion, it wasn't very generous with backwards compatibility. Then whatever it was that came after Mountain Lion,
that's Mavericks.
Mavericks actually seemed to go back further and embrace devices that have been left behind by Mountain Lion. Is Yosemite?
I'm not sure that's accurate, but pretty much anything that can run Mavericks can run Yosemite. Now, running again is a relative term.
Yeah.
I've got it running on a 2009 iMac, and that's a machine that technically at a lot of levels should be obsolete. But it still, it still runs it boots up in the morning and it works. So it's there. Apple, I think, does okay with this, but as with things like handoff, there's always going to be some people who are left behind or some people who are kind of a bit grumbly because they can't upgrade. And there is a certain point, of course, with technology where you've just got to say, well, look, you've had a good number of years of use out of it. And actually, they're a bit more generous, I think, on the Mac side than they are on the iOS side, given how quickly relative models of iPads and iPhones and iPod Touches go out of date. Adam, HBO in the States has always been a package that you could only get with cable, but they've just announced that they're going online. What's this going to mean? Yeah,
this is a big deal because it's not that hard to break into Netflix or sneak into Netflix. You are paying. It's not that hard to sneak into Hulu and the others, but it has always been very hard to sneak into HBO's online service because, as you say, you need a home subscription. It's the equivalent of Foxtel Go that only works if you have Foxtel at home. HBO don't have the equivalent of Foxtel Play where you can say, just give it to me on the internet. Now that's
except weirdly in Norway.
Yes, except weirdly in Norway. There's HBO Nordic, I think, and Australians are already sneaking into HBO Nordic because it's one of the few opportunities where you can get HBO just online. All you got to do is come up with a fake address and get them to accept your credit card. You don't have to have any home billing details. Now, this is going to change because I think it's the end of next year. HBO is talking about bringing out the equivalent of what we would call Foxtel Play. So
a fully over-the-top internet service.
A fully over-the-top internet service with no need for you must have a home connection. So you can now be Joe Bloggs living at 1A Cupertino Circle or whatever it is that Apple uses as their address and sneak in. Or I always liked 1060 West Addison.
Australians living in Beverly Hills for some reason.
1060 West Addison is good, but watch out for sales tax. If you're coming up with a fake US, because I used to live at Wrigley Fields and then I realised I was paying Illinois sales tax. So I now live in Delaware. Check your sales tax when you're coming up with your fake US address. So It won't be as easy to get in as Netflix, because Netflix is very happy to look the other way and accept Australian credit cards these days. There's no way HBO will do that. But where there's a will, there's a way. And if you can get in online with just a credit card and a fake address, people will find their way in. It will probably be cheaper than what we're paying here for Foxtel Play. So if you only want Game of Thrones...
I'm not so convinced as you are that it's going to be cheaper than Foxtel Play.
If you want Game of Thrones on Foxtel Play, you're up for $50 a month, though.
Yeah, I know you are. But the thing is, HBO is a bit like Apple in this situation.
Yes.
In that they view themselves as a premium brand, and undeniably HBO view themselves as a premium brand, but also in that they've got the stuff that people want and people are willing to pay money for. And it's pretty simple economics that says you charge what people will pay. HBO's already got all these cable subscribers in the States, and yeah, I agree with you. I think they will probably block Australian credit cards. They'll make that little bit harder, and yes, there are workarounds for that, and maybe they'll block those too. I think they've got a bit more of a vested interest owing to their existing deal with Foxtel to block that. But that being said, they've got all these cable subscribers who are all happily paying a certain sum, and they've got the cable companies who, while they want to push into this over-the-top market, they don't necessarily want to exactly tick them off. They're not going to cut their own throats and say, well, actually, we'll offer it to the consumers cheaper than we offer it to the cable providers.
They're not going to cut their own throats yet.
That's just not going to happen.
Not yet.
And you're talking about a US market where there are already low-cost providers like Netflix. And as we said before, Netflix does not run a whole bunch of first-run content.
You know HBO pretty much.
But and no HBO, certainly. But you got your Netflix, which is $10 a month, but that is going up. They are pushing those prices up. They're pushing up towards $12, $15 US. And of course, from an Australian perspective, you've got to add a few bucks in there for some kind of DNS or unblocking service.
An exchange rate
on top
and
of
all that kind of stuff.
Plus exchange rate. You're probably
HBO Nordic
closer to $20 a month.
HBO Nordic works out at about 15 Australian dollars a month. So even if you add a bit more, even if HBO is 20 or $25 a month, even Australian, still a much better deal if all you want is that HBO. If all you want is Game of Thrones and True Detective, then it's a good deal. But if you like Foxtel Play because you're getting a few other shows that aren't HBO, then you still might find that you're better off with Foxtel Play, even though it's more expensive. I'd be very surprised if HBO Go was $50 a month. Even for HBO, I know they're
50
arrogant.
would be top tier, but I would not be surprised to see them go somewhere in the $30 to $40 range. And as soon as you get $30 to $40 US, plus exchange rates, plus flipping it through for some kind of DNS or VPN service, you're getting perilously close to what Foxtel's already offering. So I guess the other thing that this throws up, if you're buying just HBO, and for a lot of Australians, just HBO would be primarily Game of Thrones, but they do a lot of other things. Do you think that this will also start that push towards the death of your traditional pay TV, here are our packages model?
Now, see, that's the thing that we've been waiting for a long time to see what would happen with that. And people expected Foxtel to stick their head in the sand a lot more than they did. People expected Foxtel to hold out on things like Foxtel Play for a long time. And talk of fibre to the premises sort of, I think, forced their hand a little bit, even if that's not the way it worked out in the end. It's still a long way away, but it will come, I think, and there will come a day where HBO crunches the numbers and says, you know what, screw Foxtel, we'll go direct and the numbers will add up better for us. But not in the next 2 or 3 years, but I think that has to be the long term. As people get faster broadband and they look for new models, if they can have people pay in advance for to watch a series and that they can fund it that way, and cut out their partners, reach a wider audience, they must be already thinking about this kind of stuff, even if it doesn't quite add up yet.
Well, the thing with HBO, though, is that in a sense you are still buying a package. You might like Game of Thrones, but the 30, 40, 50, whatever it's going to be dollars that you're going to give them per month is not just going to fund Game of Thrones, it's going to fund other things which you may or may not watch. Equally, the 2 to 3 year figure is an interesting one because there's a few players in Australia already in this kind of over-the-top model market. If you've got some particular niche interests, things like anime or professional wrestling, oddly enough, WWE offers its network here. Way cheaper than, again, Foxtel actually offer their pay-per-views.
And some of the other sports codes in the US as well will let you subscribe from here. Sports a really interesting one with what's available online, and it's actually in the last. It used to be.
It's the most interested in sport I think I've ever been.
But in the last couple of years, it's actually amazing how much legitimate sport you can find online. There's lots of dodgy streams coming out of Asia and stuff like that, but there are a lot of legitimate services now where you can subscribe just to watch one sport. And Australian service like the AFL will offer it overseas, but not here. But then you can do a reverse and pretend you're somewhere else and subscribe to those services. So there is a lot you can find if you are prepared to pay. But you, as you say, you just want this particular sport. There's a lot more around than there was a couple of years ago. So that about wraps it up for another episode of Vertical Hold. And if you like what you see, please click subscribe.
And we'll see you next time.